Michael Hyland reporting, and the state Supreme Court has already said that they are going to take up the case, but whatever the judge in Wake County decides will impact what the Supreme Court considers. So let's go ahead and bring in our chief legal correspondent, Seema Iyer, right now, who is covering today's hearing as well.
Now, Seema, the Leandro case, I mean, huge, long history here, and it seems that the principles have stayed the same, but it's the interpretation of this case that just allows this thing to be able to give it some life and keeps it in court.
That is correct, absolutely. Now, the Leandro case, just to be clear, it has been litigated twice, and the first time it was in 1994, and the 1997 decision is what we know as Leandro 1. But what came out was that every child in North Carolina has a constitutional right to a sound, basic education. So Leandro 1, the 1997 case, put forth 3 pillars, and that was reaffirmed in Leandro 2, which was the 2004 case. Now, when I talk about pillars, I talk about court rulings. So what were they? Number 1, talented, licensed teachers in every classroom in this state. Number 2, a talented, licensed principal in every school. And number 3, resources necessary for every single child. So those are the essence, the principles. But what has kept this case in the courts is in Leandro 2, the court said there are many ways to get to those pillars. There's many paths. Now, on one side, we have the plaintiffs, and those are predominantly the students. They're saying the court can order the state to pay up. But on the other side, we have the state, and they're saying the court doesn't have the constitutional authority to order money from the Treasury to be distributed. So again, we're always talking about this whole idea of separation of powers. A lot of kids probably know this more than the adults, and that is the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches.
Okay, so after today's hearing, is there any question whether North Carolina does have the money to pay for this? And did the judge push back on all of it?
Okay, so
on our other side, that is.
Right. Okay, so the good news, and this was like the easy part of the day, is that both sides repeatedly said they have conceded that the money is there. But it was the judge who brought up that there's over $2 billion in something called a rainy day fund. Remember that $2 billion is over the $1.7 billion in dispute. Now, the judge also brought up there is $4.25 billion in a savings reserve. The judge pushed the lawyers on whether that money could be used and said he was trying to figure out what role, if any, the General Assembly had in coming up with this budget plan that they kept talking about all day. Now, the lawyer questions said it was prepared. This plan was mostly prepared with the executive branch, which again goes to the state's argument of separation of powers, that no court can make the General Assembly change the law. The court can only suggest alternatives. Now, finally, this was super interesting. The judge confronted the state with a $3.39 billion capital infrastructure fund. Judge seemed to be suggesting that education was more important than this $3.39 billion they're giving away, but the state said that money was perhaps an automatic transfer. The whole conversation was really unclear, but overall, the judge did keep bringing up these figures to suggest that the money was in fact there.
So there's really, I mean, to put this in a context, this kind of goes back to the original point. Principles are the same, but it's how somebody is interpreting this, because today even the judge said he wasn't sure how the previous judge came up with these numbers. So where are we at this point?
Okay, so number 1, this is all due in 7 days on April 20th. And the judge did make it clear that he intends to get there. Number 2, you saw that room. There were 6 closing arguments. There were 6 different lawyers speaking, but altogether there was like 15 lawyers. And what the judge is really harping on is that he doesn't know from what he's been given the documents, that what items remain unfunded. So we're talking about items like principals, pre-K programs, like what's unfunded, what's not unfunded, who is responsible for what. But the state, when they submitted their last briefs, they submitted 4 affidavits which came up with these proposed budgets, but he's saying he doesn't know how the previous judge got to their order. So it's a lot. It was a lot of math.
Yeah.
And the judge kept joking around, which is great. He said, listen, I went to law school. I purposely did not become a mathematician for this very reason. And he, he kept almost deprecating himself by saying he didn't know how they got to the numbers, but he's the one who brought up all these numbers, right? Like 4.25 billion. 3.39 billion, 2 billion. We know the money's there, right? So now, will the kids get what they deserve?
Wow.
It is always an issue when it comes to budgets, and it's always an issue when it comes down to taking care of kids' education, and this is a lot of money.
Why is there when everybody agrees? I'm sorry, I have to go now, but I just don't understand. Look, everybody agrees that kids deserve a right to a sound basic education.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
I'm gonna
And
get in
we'll
trouble
see
if I
where
don't go
this
now.
happens. And Seema Iyer, thank you for staying on top of this, and you can go now.